You hear it all the time, right? Probiotics are good for you. But what happens when you give them to the sickest patients in a hospital? Well, a huge 2023 study delivered a verdict that sent some serious shockwaves through the critical care community. And let me tell you, the answer is not what you think. Let's get into it.
So for years, there's been this really compelling idea in intensive care research. Could we use these so-called good bacteria, probiotics, as a kind of secret weapon to help our most vulnerable patients in the ICU? I mean, the idea sounds so simple, and it seems so promising. But is it actually true?
To really get why this was such a hopeful idea, we have to start with the gut. It's not just for digestion. It's a massive part of our body's defense system.
Okay, so picture this. When someone is critically ill, their gut's internal ecosystem just gets thrown into complete chaos. The bad bacteria can start to take over. So the theory, and it was a really elegant one, was simple. What if we just introduce a flood of good bacteria to restore that balance? The hope was that these probiotics could beef up the gut wall and help the body fight off deadly infections. On paper, the logic seemed absolutely flawless.
But, in science, a good idea just isn't enough. As researchers started gathering more and more data, the picture got, incredibly confusing. What once seemed so clear was now a genuine scientific puzzle.
So you had these two completely different stories. On one side, you had a bunch of smaller, earlier studies that were super encouraging. They were suggesting things like lower rates of pneumonia for patients on ventilators. But then, bam, in 2021, this massive, high-quality study with over 2,600 patients comes out and finds the complete opposite: zero benefit. And even worse, there are hints of potential harm. So, who is right?
To settle this debate once and for all, researchers launched a massive investigation. They decided, okay, we're going to gather every credible piece of evidence ever produced on this topic to find the definitive answer.
And they did this using a really powerful tool called a meta-analysis. You can think of it like the Supreme Court of scientific evidence. Instead of just relying on one trial, it mathematically combines the results from tons of different studies to see what the total weight of evidence really says.
And when I say the scale of this investigation was enormous, I'm not kidding. They didn't just look at a few studies. They systematically pulled together 71 different randomized controlled trials on this topic. 71! And those 71 trials included a grand total of, get this, over 8,500 patients. This is, without a doubt, the most comprehensive look at this question ever attempted. But they didn't even stop there.
They also added this extra layer of statistical muscle. Using a method called trial sequential analysis, they basically built in a fact-checker to make absolutely sure the results weren't just some random fluke. This is so crucial for making sure you don't jump to the wrong conclusion.
So with all that data, all that statistical power, what did they find? Well, the verdict was in, and it was a complete reversal of what so many had hoped for. Hey, remember that early promise about preventing pneumonia in patients on ventilators? That was the #1 hope for probiotics in the ICU. Well, this definitive analysis showed it was a false positive. It turns out those earlier, smaller studies were probably misleading. When you combine all the data together, that benefit completely vanishes.
But the disappointment didn't stop there. The researchers looked at everything else. Could probiotics prevent other infections? Nope. Reduce diarrhea? No. Or, and this is the big one, could they save lives? The answer was a resounding no right across the board. The benefits everyone was hoping for just weren't there.
But this is where the story takes an even darker turn. It wasn't just that probiotics didn't help. The data hinted they might actually cause harm. The analysis found a small but statistically significant increase in adverse events. We're talking things like bloodstream infections for the patients who got probiotics. The scale was no longer just balanced. It was tipping from no benefit firmly into potential risk.
Now, this isn't just some academic exercise. Findings like these change how medicine is actually practiced at the bedside. They literally rewrite the rulebook for doctors and nurses in the ICU.
And the authors of the study could not have been more clear in their conclusion. Their official recommendation based on this mountain of evidence is that the routine use of probiotics in critically ill adults should not be done. That's a powerful, unambiguous statement.
So let's just sum this all up. After decades of research, 71 different trials, and thousands of patients, the final answer is that routine probiotic use in the ICU is just not supported by the evidence. For these incredibly sick patients, the risk-to-benefit calculation just doesn't add up. And you know, while that might sound disappointing, this is actually a huge victory for science. It shows how we can challenge old beliefs with better, more powerful evidence to protect our patients.
So this might be the end of the road for using generic, one-size-fits-all probiotics in the ICU. But it raises a really fascinating new question. Could the future be in a much more personalized approach? Maybe tailoring specific strains of bacteria to specific patients at specific times? Now, that's the next great puzzle for science to solve.